books several times tonight. Let me quote mine once in a while. There is a table there with references that you can check out of the species, some examples of the species that have actually been observed within historical time, within the last 100 years or so. So speciation, origin of new species, does occur. It's a myth that it does not. I think that's about it for that question.
Next question. There's been no mention as to why an eyeball would evolve in the first place. In the absence of a creator or designer, an organism would have to realize that there was a capacity for sight without prior knowledge of it or evidence for it. How can an organism therefore develop sight?
No, that doesn't work that way. The eye originated as a single, very simple pigment that is sensitive to light. You might not think of that as an eye, but if it makes the difference, if you're a microorganism, you're a unicellular organism, you have this little pigment, which is a very simple molecule, by the way, it doesn't require much complexity, and that pigment tells you, look, there is light over there and there is darkness over there, and guess what? Food is actually usually related to light, then you better swim that way. Well, that little pigment is going to make the difference for you between life and death. So eyes don't evolve overnight. They don't evolve because organisms know that they need eyes. As I said before, it is a co-evolutionary process between the organism and the environment. So you start with tiny little steps, tiny little things which are very simple, and then you become more and more complicated because, in fact, guess what? Once that I can tell if there is light over there and darkness over here, it might be advantageous if a mutation in that pigment or in the structure in which that pigment is actually housed will tell me not only that there is light versus non-light, but it tells me that there is more light in one direction and less light in the other direction, meaning that it's capable of detecting a gradient. From there on, if you can form very simple images, very, very blurred ones, it's very advantageous because any image is better than nothing, and so on and so forth. You keep going that way. By the way, this process has been simulated under computer conditions, and it turns out that the intermediate steps that have been predicted by evolutionary biologists are exactly what a computer simulation will give you if you don't give the program any prior knowledge of where you want to end up at the end. That's pretty interesting indirect evidence that the eye evolved that way. The other evidence, which is more direct, you can actually look at many of the intermediate steps because many of the organisms living today still have the intermediate steps. You can find a bunch of gradations of complexity in the eye. It's not that every organism on Earth has a complex eye.
Okay, you misquoted me twice last time. I never said there were 10,000 species on the ark. Get it right this time. I said there are 10,000 kinds. Kinds. Very, very important distinction, okay? And I never said nobody has ever observed a new species. I never said that. Nobody's ever observed a new kind. You got it? Good. Okay. Now, let's go to the eyeball here. Charles Darwin said, to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd. This textbook says the complex structure of the human eye may be the product of millions of years of evolution. This one says, I'll blow it up for you a little bit here, you can better understand how the eye might have evolved if you picture a series of changes during the evolution of the eye. This is exactly what he said a moment ago. You have to picture it. You have to imagine it. It doesn't take place in reality. You have to imagine how it happened. Imagine an animal with a spot that is sensitive to light. That gives him an advantageous, an advantage over those that don't have this spot, and therefore he's going to survive and the rest are going to be killed. See, evolution is based on death. One animal evolves a little better than the rest have to die in order for that one with the spot to take over the population. Evolution is based on the idea that death is wonderful, death is good, death's how we get ahead, the bad ones have to die.
Thank you.
That's exactly the opposite of creation. The Bible says God formed the eye. That's the way it happened.
Next question's for you. Dr. Hovind's argument would be nullified if it could be conclusively proven that God does not exist. Please address the existence of God from a purely scientific perspective.
Address the existence of God from a scientific perspective. Here we have an example of somebody defining the argument, and by the definition of their terms for science, of course, see, they say science has to be observable, testable, demonstrable, and that's going to automatically exclude God. Well, if that's your, they've set up the parameters where it's a no-win situation for the creationist. I think that we have the same situation for those who teach evolution. They believe in the existence of all sorts of things. They believe there are beneficial mutations, though nobody's ever proven one. They believe an animal can produce a different kind of animal, though nobody's ever observed one. It's not part of science. I cannot scientifically prove the existence of God. I can tell you he changed my life a whole lot 31 years ago. Anybody else in that boat? Yeah. There's my evidence right there. Changed lives. He can make the prostitute pure, make the drunkard sober, and make the liar quit lying. He can do amazing things.
I would like to remind Mr. Hovind that this is a scientific debate. We're not in a church. If you want to do something like this in a church, it'll be fine. What was the original question?
Dr. Hovind's argument.
Time for me.
Dr. Hovind's argument would be nullified if it could be conclusively proven that God does not exist. Please address the existence of God from a purely scientific perspective.
Right. Well, as I said, the existence of God, I mean, so on this one, Mr. Hovind is definitely correct. The existence of God is not a scientific question, not because that doesn't mean that science excludes, I mean, the interpretation is science excludes anything that you cannot analyze. That's a fallacy, and that's a fallacy that plays in his field, but it's completely untrue, and I don't see why he insists in making it. The fact that something cannot be analyzed scientifically doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay. Our science, as far as I know, cannot analyze why certain people are so fond of the Three Stooges. Does that mean that there are no people out there that are fond of the Three Stooges? Of course not. Science cannot tell me, at this point at least, why is it that I'm so fond of Monty Python. But then, nevertheless, that doesn't negate that fact. So the fact that there are things that are outside of science, it's not equivalent to say that those things don't exist. On the other hand, I will call again on Hume's dictum. You're making a very extraordinary claim, so where's the evidence? Not scientific, but what kind of evidence do you have at all?
Can any known organism be traced back all the way to one cell?
Yeah, you were born that way. Whoever answered that question. The process of development is not well understood. That is one of the other things. There's a large number of academic journals on people working on developmental biology. Developmental biology is something that we know a lot about, but we know an awful lot. There is an awful lot that we don't know about. But nevertheless, you can observe the development of anything from one cell. In fact, everything develops from one cell. Now, in historical times, how would that happen? Well, I don't see what the problem is there. I mean, if you can see it under your nose over the span of a few hours or the span of a few weeks, I don't see what the problem would be over the span of millions of years. All you need is, for example, a unicellular cell originally that has a mutation and duplicates that cell without then separating them. Now you have a multicellular organism, a two-cellular organism. Okay? If that gets inherited because of the mutation was heritable,